There's a strange kind of quiet that settles in Harlem when the streets are watching. It's not the peace of safety. No, it's the silence that comes before a storm, before the sirens, before the blood dries on the pavement. In that silence, sometime in the late 60s, a man named Nicky Barnes was learning how to disappear inside his own legend. He didn't come from money, not from royalty. His kingdom was concrete, his crown, a clean-cut suit, dark sunglasses, and the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to take. But before the fame, before the magazines, before the DEA called him Mr. Untouchable, he was just a small-time hustler. Another black man locked up in the system, learning rules written by men who never expected him to survive, let alone thrive. He watched, he listened, he learned. Otisville Correctional Facility was where he picked up his real education, not from books, but from the whispers of older inmates who understood the game deeper than he did. Men who had already lost everything and figured they had nothing left to lie about. And Nicky? He was smart, scary smart, but he didn't flaunt it. He absorbed everything, then made a decision that would change Harlem forever. He wasn't going back to being small time. Imagine this. The hum of cars on Lenox Avenue, streetlights flickering like weak candles in the dusk, boys selling dope on corners like candy, cops rolling past slow, eyes sharp, but hands off. And in the middle of all of it, a black Cadillac with dark windows, engine soft. Inside, Nicky Barnes, silent, still, wearing a suit worth more than the average Harlem paycheck, staring out like a man who owned the block. Because in a way, he did. With the council, he created something Harlem had never seen, a full-scale heroin operation, professionally run, ruthlessly protected. Each member had a role, a territory, rules, disputes, handled like businessmen. That's what made him different. Nicky didn't just want money, he wanted power, structured, clean, organized power. He wanted to be a black godfather, above the mess, untouched by chaos. And for a while, he was. The government hated it. They couldn't touch him, not really. Not with the money he had, the lawyers he paid, and the silence he bought. Even when the FBI pushed, even when agents swore they had him, Nicky walked free, again and again. Hence the name, Mr. Untouchable. But no one stays untouchable forever. What they didn't see, what Nicky didn't even fully understand, was that while he built an empire on heroin and discipline, the streets were changing. Loyalty was cracking. The city was getting meaner, hungrier, more desperate. And prison? Prison was always waiting, like a bad dream that never leaves your bed. So when they finally got him, hard, solid, with multiple life sentences, the silence came back. The same silence from those Harlem nights, the kind that says something's about to break. But no one expected Nicky to be the one to snap. He watched the empire crumble from behind glass, watched his so-called brothers keep dealing, keep building, without him, without cutting him in, without keeping their word. And when they moved in on his wife, that was it. From drug kingpin to government informant, the fall wasn't loud. It was cold, quiet, personal, because betrayal doesn't always come with bullets. Sometimes it comes with a name on paper. And so begins the journey, the life and death of a man who was feared, admired, envied, then hated. This is not a fairy tale. This is Nicky Barnes, the man who rose from jail, ruled a city, and in the end, gave it all up to burn the very kingdom he built. There's something about power that makes a man think he's invincible. Not because the world stops throwing punches, but because for a while, he stops feeling them. That was Nicky in the early 70s. Untouchable wasn't just a name, it was a state of mind. But let's not jump ahead. Let's go back to when Harlem first began whispering his name, not in fear, not yet, but in curiosity. Who was the man behind the Cadillac? Who was this smooth-talking, sharply dressed figure gliding through the borough like he was born on velvet? In truth, he wasn't gliding. He was calculating. Nicky Barnes understood something most men on the street didn't. Violence draws attention, but order makes money. He studied the Italians, the five families, the way they moved like a machine, not a mob. There were codes, boundaries, structures. It wasn't about loud killings in daylight. It was about quiet respect, silent control, and money that never stopped flowing. And Harlem? It was wild back then. Every corner had a dealer, every block had a problem. Shootings weren't rare, they were part of the rhythm. Blood soaked into sidewalks like it belonged there. That kind of chaos was bad for business, so Nicky set out to fix it, his way. He called them the Council. A collection of 7 trusted men, not random thugs, but thinking men, calculating men. Drug lords, yes, but businessmen first. Each controlled a part of the city. Each was loyal to the rules. Disputes didn't end in gunfire. They ended in votes. And Nicky? He sat at the head like a dark CEO. His heroin came straight from Southeast Asia, pure and deadly. It moved through corrupt cops, through secret routes, hidden inside coffins of dead soldiers coming home from Vietnam. They called it blue magic. High quality, uncut, and it sold fast, too fast. Soon, Barnes was raking in millions. He bought buildings, nightclubs, laundromats, anything that could clean his dirty money. He owned so many businesses, most people didn't even know which ones were real anymore. What mattered was the illusion. Barnes wasn't just a dealer. He was a symbol. Harlem looked up to him, some with envy, some with admiration. He gave back, paid rent for struggling families, donated to churches, took care of his crew, wore the best suits, spoke with poise, carried himself like a senator. He made crime look polished, made it look professional. And for a while, it worked. But there's a cost to being untouchable, a quiet paranoia that starts to sneak into the back of your mind. You don't notice it at first. You laugh, you drink, you flash your gold rings and silk shirts. But then someone looks at you a second too long. Someone whispers when you enter a room. A car follows too close. A phone rings too many times. The cracks start forming. By 1977, Time magazine put Nicky Barnes on the cover. Mr. Untouchable. Most men would have hidden from that kind of attention. Nicky, he embraced it. He smiled in the photos, gave interviews, sat like a king in velvet chairs, legs crossed, glasses hiding his eyes like he had nothing to prove to anyone. He thought he was mocking the system. But really, he was daring them. The feds were furious. He had beaten them for years. Cases dismissed, witnesses vanished, lawyers bought. But now he was taunting them in print, gloating, and the system doesn't like being laughed at. Behind the scenes, pressure built, wiretaps increased, surveillance doubled, informants planted, and all the while, Nicky kept building, kept trusting, kept thinking the game would never catch up to him. It was pride, that dangerous kind of pride that whispers in a man's ear, they can't touch you, until they do. In 1978, the hammer finally dropped. Conspiracy, racketeering, drug trafficking. A laundry list of charges stacked so high, even his best lawyers couldn't find daylight. They threw everything they had at him, and this time, it stuck. Nicky Barnes, Harlem's Kingpin, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence was enough. The kind of silence that says you're not untouchable anymore. Now, prison. Prison does something to a man like Nicky. He wasn't afraid. He'd been there before. But this was different. This time there was no end in sight. No appeal, no deal. Just steel bars and time, years of it, cold and quiet. At first he held firm. He read, wrote letters, heard news from the outside. The council was still operating. Money was still flowing. He still had a name. But slowly, things changed. Phone calls weren't returned. Visits stopped coming. People forgot. And worse, they disrespected him. His own men, the ones he trusted, the ones he put in power, they started moving behind his back, selling without cutting him in, sleeping with his wife, living like he never existed. That hurt more than any cell could. Not just the betrayal, but the erasure. like he had been nothing more than a stepping stone. That's what broke him. And then, something happened. Quietly, without warning. Nicky made a decision. He called the DEA. He said 4 words. "I'm ready to talk." What came next was one of the most shocking betrayals in the history of American organized crime. Nicky didn't just talk, he sang names, dates, shipments, bank accounts, details only a man on the inside could know. He brought down the entire council, testified against 43 people, including judges, lawyers, old friends, and his own former crew. Men who once kissed his ring, now facing life because he chose to burn the kingdom he built. And he didn't flinch. He gave it all. Why? Because Nikki Barnes wasn't just angry. He was done. Done with loyalty that meant nothing. Done with men who smiled to his face and stabbed his name behind closed doors. Done being a myth locked in a cell while others got rich on his silence. So he flipped the board. In 1998, after nearly 2 decades behind bars, Nikki Barnes disappeared. The government gave him a new identity, a new face, a second life under witness protection. Most of Harlem thought he was dead. He wasn't. He was alive, somewhere, watching. And in rare moments, very rare, he spoke about his past, not with shame, not with pride, just honesty. He admitted he was greedy, admitted he lost control, admitted he built something powerful and destroyed it because the people inside didn't deserve to wear his crown. He once said, "If they had stayed loyal, I'd still be doing life, and they'd be free." That was Nikki Barnes, a king with no kingdom, a myth that chose to break itself because reality was too bitter to swallow whole. So now you know, Mr. Untouchable wasn't invincible. He was just a man, a brilliant, dangerous, flawed man who built an empire, watched it turn on him, and chose revenge over silence. He didn't die in a blaze of glory. He didn't rot in a prison cell. He just vanished. And maybe that's fitting, because ghosts like Nikki, they don't fade. They haunt. Prison has a way of peeling the shine off a man's name. On the outside, Nikki Barnes was a king. The suits, the money, the respect. That was his armor. But behind bars, with cold concrete underfoot and fluorescent lights humming overhead, nobody cared who he used to be. In prison, everyone's just a number. And for the first few months after his sentencing, Nikki wore that number like a scar. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just watched, like he always did, calm, still, but alive under the surface. The other inmates watched him too, some with awe, some with envy, some waiting for him to crack. But he didn't. Not yet. His cell was small, sterile, 4 steps from the bunk to the wall, the kind of space that makes your thoughts feel louder than they should be. On the wall above his bed, he pinned a photo of Harlem, not the skyline, but the street, his block, the very corner where he used to park his Cadillac and watch the world spin for him. He stared at that picture for hours some nights, like if he focused hard enough, the brick would soften and he could just step through. But dreams didn't come easy anymore. When they did, they were brutal. Faces of men he put down, women crying, hands reaching for him, not to shake, but to pull him under. Sleep became a battleground, so he started keeping a journal, not for therapy, not for redemption, just to remember who he really was. Before the prison, before the magazine covers, before the betrayal. He wrote about the first time he sold a brick, the first time he held a dying man in his arms and realized he felt nothing. The first time he told his mother he'd never be broke again, and meant it. And then he got word. It came from a guard, a whisper in the yard, just 3 sentences that changed everything. "Your crew's still dealing. They're not cutting you in. One of them's effing your wife." At first, Nikki didn't believe it. Couldn't. These were the men he built, the men he protected, his counsel, his brothers. But prison teaches you not to trust your heart. It teaches you to listen to patterns, to silence, to the names that don't show up on visitation logs, to the letters that stop coming, the money that doesn't land in your commissary. And when the silence got loud enough, Nicky knew. They had moved on, without him, forgotten him, erased him. They had left their king behind. The rage didn't come in one burst, it crept in, slow, steady, venomous. He replayed every conversation he'd ever had with them, every handshake, every lie, every promise. He remembered looking some of them in the eyes and saying, "If I go down, you don't move unless I tell you to." They agreed. They swore. And now? Now they were making millions off his silence. That's when the idea started to crawl into his mind. Ugly, unthinkable, but also clean. Burn it all down. For weeks he resisted it. He told himself he could outlast this, that loyalty would return, that maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for the right time to come through for him. But then one day, a letter came. It was from his wife, 6 pages long. The first 4 were cold and distant. Excuses, explanations, I didn't plan it, you weren't there, things changed. But the last 2, they shattered something. She told him she was pregnant, told him who the father was, told him it was better if he stopped writing. She didn't even sign it with love. Just her name. Just her new name. That night, Nicky didn't sleep. He just sat on his bunk, the letter shaking in his hands, the edges damp with sweat. That was it. That was the moment he died, not physically, but spiritually. The man who held the streets in his palm, who dressed like royalty, who had Harlem eating from his hand, he was gone. What sat in that cell now was something colder, sharper, not angry, resolved. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't send word to his crew, didn't give warnings. He went straight to the feds. The guards were confused. They'd never seen him request a meeting, never seen him even flinch. But he walked into that room like a man with a plan. And when they sat him down across from a grim-faced agent who had chased him for years, Nicky leaned forward and said, "You want him? I'll give you everyone." They thought he was bluffing. They'd heard that before, from junkies, low-level players, rats trying to cut deals. But then he started talking, not in riddles, in facts, names, routes, shipment sizes, bank accounts, hideouts, judges on payroll, lawyers who laundered, cops who protected, hits that never got reported, bodies that got buried deep in construction sites. He was surgical. The agent stopped him mid-sentence and said, "Are you telling me you're going to bring down your entire crew?" Nicky nodded, expression flat. "They brought themselves down. I'm just finishing the job." Over the next 2 years, Nicky Barnes testified against 43 people. He wore suits to court, sat calm, gave full testimony with no stuttering, looked former friends in the eye while he named them one by one. Some cried, some cursed. One tried to charge him in court before the bailiffs tackled him. Didn't matter. Nicky just kept going. The streets of Harlem started whispering again, but this time, not in admiration. They called him a traitor, a snake, a rat. Murals that once praised him were painted over. His name vanished from the corners he used to own. But Nicky didn't care. He'd already made peace with being hated. He wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was chasing closure. In 1998, the government granted him a new identity. He disappeared. New name, new face, new life. And in his final public interview years later, he said something that stuck with every man who ever thought they were too big to fall. "They broke the rules, not me." He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg for understanding, just told the truth, his truth, the truth of a man who built an empire, lost everything, and chose fire over silence. They say he died in 2012, no funeral, no grave, no ceremony, just a name, Leroy Nicky Barnes, fading into the shadows he used to rule. But some people say he's still out there, quiet, watching, living under a name that means nothing to the world, but everything to the system. And maybe that's the final irony. The man who was once untouchable touched everyone around him so deeply they never truly recovered. Not the streets, not his crew, not even the government. The king is gone. But the story still breathes. When news travels through prison, it doesn't move in whispers, it moves in waves. One day, you're eating chow with your crew like nothing's wrong. The next, every pair of eyes in the room is locked on you like they already know what you don't. That's what happened to Slim, one of Nicky's old council lieutenants. He was doing a light stretch at Allenwood, 5 years on a gun charge, nothing major. Figured he'd do his time quiet, maybe come out to a few leftover crumbs from the old empire. He still carried the name with pride. Then, the news hit. Nicky flipped. It came from a Puerto Rican kid, New Fish, who'd just come down from a federal trial in Manhattan. Said Nicky had sat in court like a damn professor, naming names like he was reading from a directory. Slim laughed at first, said it was bull. Nicky was a lot of things, but he wasn't a rat. But then more stories rolled in. Inmates from different facilities, staff gossip. Even a guard slipped up and said, "Your boy's singing like it's Sunday morning." Slim didn't laugh anymore. He didn't speak for 2 days, didn't eat much either. Just sat in his bunk, hands folded, thinking about the last time he saw Nicky, 2 years ago across a courtroom during a hearing. He remembered the look in Nicky's eyes, cold, distant, but not broken. Now it made sense. That look wasn't surrender, it was strategy. At another prison, USP Leavenworth, Frank Black Ice Wilkins was pacing in his cell, breathing heavy. He was one of the founding 7 of the council, helped Nicky build the heroin routes, knew every brick, every stash house, every killer they'd ever used. When a young cat on his block passed him the news, Frank almost broke his hand punching the wall. That slick motherfucker. He didn't cry, didn't rant, just stood there, fists clenched, heartbeat thumping like war drums. He thought about how many times he'd risked his life for Nicky, how many enemies he'd buried to protect the throne. And now? Now that same throne was spitting fire on all of them. Across the system, dozens of men who once wore suits, counted bricks, and kissed Nicky's ring were suddenly facing new indictments. Names they hadn't heard in years were being dug up like old corpses. Indictments stacked, deals collapsed, families broke. And those who weren't locked up yet, they were burning phones and moving fast. Harlem was no longer safe for anyone tied to the council. Because when a man like Nicky talks, the whole tree shakes. But let's pull back for a second. Let's go inside the cell block again. Not for action, but for intimacy. Let's sit with Nicky. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't panicking. He was writing letters, notes, testimony drafts, not for the public, for the feds. He knew what he was doing. Every name he gave was a weight off his chest and a chain around someone else's neck. He wasn't just cooperating. He was engineering a collapse, methodically, efficiently. Because betrayal, when done right, doesn't come with screaming. It comes with documents. And Nikki Barnes? He didn't just burn bridges. He poured gasoline, watched them light, and took notes. But deep inside, a war was brewing. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was self-preservation. He knew they'd want him dead now, not just on the street, but inside. Federal prison may seem tight, but shanks travel. Enemies find ways. And Nicky knew too many faces, too many men with old scores and fresh rage. The feds tried isolating him, moving him between facilities, but the pressure kept building. Word travels fast and whispers carry knives. One night, after lights out, a CO found a message carved into the wall near Nicky's cell. A rat dies slow. Meanwhile, on the outside, Harlem felt like it had been split down the middle. There were 2 camps. One, the betrayed old heads, corner bosses, low-level distributors, all furious. They used to speak Nicky's name like a badge of honor. Now they spit it like poison. Bars that once played his name in rap verses dropped it from the hook. Murals of him vanished overnight. His empire wasn't just collapsing, it was being erased. 2, the silent ones. These were younger cats. Some barely knew Nicky, but they understood the code. And that code had just been shattered. They watched and learned. Loyalty dies quick. Money fades. The only thing real? Leverage. Back in prison, Nicky was moved again, this time to a secure federal unit, special protection, isolated but comfortable. A little more space, a little more quiet. But the quiet wasn't peace, it was pressure, because now the feds wanted more. Who were the judges? Which cops took cash? Who buried the witnesses in '72? And Nikki gave them answers, not all at once, but in layers, like peeling skin from a beast. Because here's the thing about a man who's lost everything. He stops caring who burns. One day, in a rare moment, he sat in the interview room across from an agent he actually liked. The agent lit a cigarette, offered one to Nikki. Nikki took it, leaned back, blew smoke slow. "Tell me something," the agent said, narrowing his eyes. "Why now? Why flip after all these years?" Nikki didn't blink, didn't smirk. He just said one sentence. "Because I built that house, and I'll be damned if I let rats live in it." The agent chuckled. Nikki didn't. Meanwhile, in New York, Frank Wilkins made a call from a prison payphone. It wasn't to a lawyer. It wasn't to family. It was to a hitter, old school, loyal, quiet. Frank spoke in code, gave no names, but the message was clear. "I want him gone." The other end paused, then clicked. No promises, just business. Nikki didn't flinch when word came down. He knew there'd be contracts on his head, but at this point, it didn't scare him. He was already a ghost. What rattled him more was that he couldn't feel anything anymore. No guilt, no joy, not even rage, just movement. Wake up, eat, write, testify, sleep. His life had turned into paperwork and silence. But even ghosts dream. One night, Nikki dreamed he was back on the block. The sun was hot, cars lined the street. Music blared from a bodega, and he was young again. Clean cut, gold watch glinting, Harlem crown sitting right on his head. People cheered when they saw him. They called out, "Mr. Untouchable." He smiled. Then the sky cracked. The cheers turned to screams, and the block burned. When he looked down, his suit was gone. Just orange. Just a number. He woke up sweating, heart pounding, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something. Not fear, regret, not for snitching, not for betraying his crew, but for becoming a man who no longer belonged anywhere. Not in Harlem, not in prison, not even in witness protection. He had cut so many strings, he was floating in nothing. A king with no kingdom. A legend with no legacy. Just a man in a cell, waiting for time to forgive what history never would. They don't tell you what happens after you disappear. Not in the movies, not in court, not even when the marshals come to give you a new life. Witness protection sounds like safety, like freedom. But for Nikki Barnes, it was something else entirely. It was silence. It was erasure. The first thing they took was his name. Leroy Nicholas Barnes, wiped. The name that made Harlem stop in its tracks, that was spoken in courtrooms and backrooms and alleyways with reverence or fear, gone in one meeting, one signature. He was given a file folder with a new name, something plain, something forgettable. He stared at it for a long time, didn't say a word, just nodded. Because deep down, he knew. You don't get to keep your name when you burn down your kingdom. They flew him out west, didn't tell him where until the plane landed. Flatlands. Dry wind. A state where no one wore suits unless they were going to court or church. No skyline, no brownstones, no jazz echoing through alleys. Just big skies and empty parking lots. The marshals handed him keys to a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. Gave him a burner phone, some documents, a little money. Fake history. Fake ID. He stood in the doorway that first night, alone, staring into a room that didn't feel like his. He'd gone from marble floors and velvet seats to yellowed linoleum and a ticking wall clock. It wasn't prison, but it wasn't freedom either. He didn't unpack for 3 days. The boxes sat untouched, the bed unused. He slept on the couch, half-dressed, a gun within reach even though no one knew who he was anymore. But old habits don't die. They just sleep. He kept the shades drawn. Didn't make eye contact in the corner store. Didn't speak unless spoken to. He told people he was from Philly, said he worked in logistics, that he used to be in trucking. People nodded, uninterested. That was the first sting. Being invisible. Not feared, not admired, not hated. just ignored. Sometimes at night, he'd walk down to the gas station and sit on the curb with a soda, just watching cars pass. No one knew he was once worth millions, that he once ran Harlem, that bodies fell when he snapped his fingers. Now he was just another older black man in a neighborhood that didn't ask questions. And maybe that's what kept him sane. For a while. But loneliness, that's a different kind of prison. You can't outthink it. Can't outrun it. You just sit with it until it decides what kind of man you'll be next. There were mornings he didn't get out of bed. There were nights he drank cheap whiskey and stared at the ceiling, wondering if it would have been better to die inside those walls as a king than live out here as a ghost. His phone never rang. His mailbox stayed empty. Even his dreams betrayed him, filled with old faces, voices from the block, bodies he buried and promises he broke. He'd wake up sweating, whispering names like prayers. Frank, Slim, Karen, names he gave up to the feds, names that once meant everything. But guilt? No. Nicky didn't believe in guilt. He believed in consequence. He didn't regret flipping. He regretted needing to. He regretted building a council of men who turned on him the second his back was against the wall. In his mind, he didn't betray them. They betrayed him first. But the mind's one thing. The heart is another. He started writing again. Not letters, not testimony, just thoughts, scraps of memory, pages of reflection. Sometimes he'd write to his younger self, sometimes to God, sometimes to the block he left behind. He wrote about Harlem the way a man writes about an ex-lover, beautiful, cruel, addictive. He'd close his eyes and see the Apollo marquee, the fruit stands, the kids running through hydrant spray in the summer. And then he'd open them again to beige walls and dusty blinds. Every once in a while, the marshals would check in, ask if he needed anything, make sure he hadn't slipped. He never had. He was too smart for that, too quiet, too tired. A year passed, then two. Time didn't move fast or slow, it just dragged. He got a job at a mechanic shop, mostly answering phones. Didn't mind it. No one looked too close. No one asked for his story. People just called him Nick, and he let them. Because Nick didn't carry the weight that Nicky Barnes did. One day, while stocking shelves at a hardware store, he heard a radio playing faintly from the back. It was an old-school DJ set, rare cuts from the 70s. Then came the line, "Harlem's own Mr. Untouchable." The host was playing an old interview clip. Nicky's voice came through, confident, smooth, untouchable. He froze. No one around him recognized the voice, but he did. He stood still for almost 2 minutes, just listening, not to the words, but to the man he used to be. It felt like watching a stranger wearing his skin. That night, he went home, opened a beer, and pulled out one of the old notebooks he kept in the back of a drawer, flipped to a blank page, and for the first time in a while, he didn't write about Harlem. He wrote about himself, not the Kingpin, not the informant, just the man. The kid who'd watched his father disappear, the teen who'd first sold dope because rent was late, the young man who mistook fear for respect, the old man who gave it all up just to survive. He didn't need to be remembered anymore, but he needed to be understood. Because somewhere deep down, even men like Nicky Barnes want someone to say, "I see why you did it," even if they still hate you. The months rolled on. He kept to himself, didn't make friends, didn't date. Trust was a muscle he hadn't used in years, but he smiled more. Not big smiles, not fake ones, just small ones. The kind that come from peace, not pride. And though he never said it out loud, he had finally accepted the truth. He'd never go back, never be who he was. And maybe that was okay. Because if Harlem was gone, and the council was gone, and the streets no longer called his name, then maybe this silence was the only thing left to hold on to. He died in 2012. They didn't publish it right away. Didn't want anyone digging too deep, just a quiet death in a quiet town. No fanfare, no headlines, no parade. The man the world once called Mr. Untouchable had finally touched something real, mortality. And in that final breath, maybe, just maybe, he felt something close to peace. Or maybe not. Harlem wasn't handed to Nicky Barnes. He took it. But he didn't take it like a thug. He didn't need to kick in doors or spray bullets through the block just to prove he was the man. That was too loud, too messy. Nicky always played the long game. By the early 70s, he had figured it out. Raw hustle wasn't enough anymore. You could move bricks all day, stack paper high, but the second you slipped, the chaos would eat you alive. You needed structure, order, governance. You needed a council. It started in a smoky room above a nightclub on 145th. Cigars burned. Music thumped faintly from downstairs. A circle of hard men sat around a table, staring at Nicky, waiting to see what kind of game he was playing. There were 7 of them, not random hitters. No. These were Harlem's elite, dope dealers, enforcers, connects, all hungry, all dangerous, all used to doing things their way. And Nicky? He walked in late, calm, crisp suit, glasses on, diamond pinky ring catching the light. He didn't sit until they asked him to. That's how you start a meeting with power. You wait to be invited, even when the room is already yours. Once he sat, he spoke slow, measured. I called you here for one reason, he said, tapping the table with 2 fingers. To build something that'll outlive all of us. Some of them laughed. One rolled his eyes. You trying to be Malcolm X now? Someone muttered. Nicky smiled, just a little. I'm trying to make sure none of us end up like that fool who ran Harlem last year. You remember him? Big mouth, fast cars, dead before the summer hit. The room went quiet. They remembered. Everyone had seen how fast you could go from king to corpse in these streets, so he laid it out. No more petty beefs, no more shootouts over corners, no more dealers stepping on product just to stretch a dollar. Harlem was bleeding itself dry, and the cops were loving every minute of it. But if they worked together, set rules, set quotas, set standards, then they could make something more powerful than any gang, more durable than any crew. A governing body. Like the Italians, one man said. Nicky nodded. But black? That word hung in the air, black. Not just a color, a purpose. Harlem's ours, Nicky said, but we've been running it like children. I say we fix that. The plan was simple on the surface, but deadly precise underneath. 7 seats, 7 votes. No one moves weight in Harlem without approval. Territories assigned, disputes mediated. Percentages go to a central pot, legal defense, bribes, rainy days, and no one talks to the feds. Those who break the rules, gone. Quietly. Without drama. It was genius. Dangerous, yes, but brilliant. And it worked. The council was born that night. 7 men who controlled Harlem like warlords disguised as businessmen. But Nicky was different. He wasn't just a seat at the table. He was the architect, the voice of reason, the shadow king. He never raised his voice, never showed anger in public. But when he spoke, men leaned in. When he frowned, people froze. Respect? He earned it. Fear? He cultivated it. Let's talk about who sat at that table, because that matters. Frank Black Ice Wilkins, brutal, strategic, old school. He ran enforcement. When someone needed to disappear, Frank made the call. Curtis CeeLo Dennis, the connector, knew how to get product in from overseas, usually through dirty union hands at the docks. Jimmy Numbers Carter handled the finances, kept books cleaner than most corporations, smart, paranoid, precise. Ray Slick Jackson, smooth talker, handled PR, lawyers, and greased palms at City Hall. Rumor had it he once slept with a judge's wife just to make a case disappear. Slim Davis, the enforcer's enforcer, hands like concrete, barely spoke, just nodded or didn't. That was enough. Terry Blues Monroe, the mouthpiece in the clubs, ran nightlife, protected distribution in the evening scene, and finally, Nicky, the face, the brain, the man who moved like he had nothing to prove because, truth be told, he didn't. They met every 2 weeks, in back rooms, basements, safe houses, no phones, no recordings, just eyes, ears, and memory. And every time they met, Harlem got quieter. Killings went down, profits went up, heroin flooded the blocks, clean, potent, deadly. People didn't beg for change, they begged for supply. Addicts lined up in alleyways like they were waiting for blessings. And Nicky? He watched it all from behind tinted windows, suit crisp, ring gleaming, sunglasses hiding the weight in his eyes. Because deep down, he knew. Control never lasts, not in the drug game. But while you have it, you make the streets dance to your rhythm. There were rules, hard ones, no stealing from each other, no unauthorized violence, no wives, no kids, no betrayal. If you touched someone's girl, you died. If you skimmed off the top, you died. And the rule everyone knew, but no one dared speak out loud. If Nicky calls your name, stand up like a man and take it. Because once your name was on his lips, you were already done. For 5 years, Harlem ran like a Swiss watch. Millions moved through the city like smoke. Bricks came in by the ton. Judges were bought. Cops stayed on leash. Nicky even had politicians shaking his hand, smiling for cameras, pretending they didn't know who was keeping their lights on. It was perfect. Too perfect. The crack started small. Frank wanted more muscle on his end, claimed he wasn't getting a fair cut. CeeLo accused someone of leaking customs routes. Slim put his hands on a dealer who was supposedly under Jimmy's umbrella. And in the middle of it all, Nicky kept the peace. He calmed tempers, shifted funds, reminded them who the real enemy was, the system, not each other. But he also kept notes, every complaint, every broken rule, every conversation that smelled like mutiny. Because Nikki Barnes wasn't just playing chess, he was building a file. One day, he told Jimmy quietly, "Keep receipts, always, even for the ones we trust." Jimmy looked confused. Why? Nicky just nodded toward the street outside the window. Because even the cleanest river turns dirty when it runs long enough. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? The council wasn't built to last. It was built out of desperation, out of ego, out of paranoia, out of hunger. 7 wolves in tailored suits pretending they were something more. And when the first dollar went missing, when the first lover slept where he shouldn't have, when the first shipment didn't land where it was promised, that's when Nicky knew. This wouldn't end in peace, it would end in fire. Every empire has its cracks long before it collapses. The concrete doesn't crumble in one night. It chips little by little. One lie, one late payment, one side conversation held just a second too long. That's how it started with the council. Not with gunshots, not with cops, not even with money. It started with doubt. Nicky always knew the game was temporary. No matter how good the suits looked, no matter how quiet the streets were running, no matter how deep their pockets got, the drug game had a timer. You either cashed out or got carried out. But he didn't expect the first crack to come from inside, from one of his own. It was late summer, 1975. The air was thick. Harlem was boiling, not from the heat, but from the weight of success. Too much money was moving, too many mouths being fed, too many egos swollen beyond repair. Nicky sat in his Cadillac, engine humming, parked a block off Lenox. Slick was in the passenger seat chewing toothpicks like always. They were waiting on CeeLo, who was late. Again. Nicky glanced at his watch. "That's the 3rd time he's missed a meet," he said, voice low. Slick shrugged, half grinning. "Maybe he got caught up with some skirt." Nicky didn't smile. "He moves one more shipment without logging it. I'm calling a vote." CeeLo had been getting sloppy. Late payments, bad product. A few new faces in his crew that weren't cleared. Worst of all, he was starting to move independent bricks. Nicky had warned him once, calmly, directly, no shouting. You move 1 more gram without running it through the system, and you're not counsel. You're just a corner boy in a suit. CeeLo laughed. Wrong move, but Nicky didn't act yet. He watched. He had Jimmy numbers dig deeper, quietly, just numbers at first. Then conversations, then locations. Turns out CeeLo had been skimming off every crate since March. Not a lot, just enough not to raise eyebrows. But Nicky noticed, because Nicky noticed everything. They met in a private spot above a jazz bar. Just Nicky, Frank, and Jimmy. 3 of the 7. Nicky laid it out on the table. Invoices, logs, street data, a ledger written in silence. Jimmy said what they were all thinking. If he's stealing from us now, what's he gonna do when heat comes down? Frank clenched his jaw. You want me to handle it? That was Frank's language, direct, no poetry. But Nicky shook his head. Not yet. Let him sweat. That weekend, they called a full council meeting. Everyone came, even CeeLo, cool as ever, acting like nothing was wrong. He laughed loud, talked big, showed up with a fresh-cut suit and a Rolex that hadn't come from their books. Nicky let him talk. Let him brag about a nightclub deal in Jersey, a new connection in Baltimore. The same Baltimore route Jimmy had flagged missing 5 bricks the week before. Then Nicky leaned forward, folded his hands, and said, CeeLo, what happened to the shipment from June 3rd? The room went still. CeeLo blinked, then smiled. June 3rd? That was delayed. Doc issue. Nicky nodded. Funny, because I got a warehouse slip says it cleared. Got sold same day. CeeLo looked around the room. Suddenly, no one was smiling. Hold up, man, what is this? Frank leaned forward. It's you being caught. CeeLo's voice sharpened. You accusing me? Jimmy dropped a file on the table. No, we proving it. Nicky could have ended him right there. Could have snapped his fingers and had Frank handle it, but he didn't. He gave CeeLo one last chance. You break one more rule, he said, eyes cold behind his shades, and you're out. No vote, no warning. You vanish. CeeLo stood up, fists clenched, face burning with embarrassment. You forget who helped build this shit, Nicky? You think I'm just some street punk? I made this too. Nicky didn't flinch. You made your cut, don't mistake that for power. CeeLo walked out. That was the last time he sat at the table. The next week, 2 things happened. 1, CeeLo's top runner turned up dead in a dumpster behind a bodega. 2, a new shipment from Jersey went missing. Entire crate, gone. No paperwork, no trace. Frank didn't wait for permission. He called for a crew to go knock down CeeLo's stash spot, but Nicky stopped him. No, let him feel like he's winning. That's when he'll get bold. And when he gets bold, Frank nodded, he slips. CeeLo did slip. A month later, a low-level runner caught a drug case in Newark. Kid was dumb, talked fast. Said he worked for the guy with the yellow Eldorado. That was CeeLo's car. Within 48 hours, word got back to the DEA. Now the feds had a name, not just any name, a council name, and just like that, the fortress had a breach. Nicky sat alone in his apartment that night, staring out the window. He didn't move, didn't blink, just thought. It had begun, the quiet falling apart, the unraveling of discipline. All it took was one man thinking he was bigger than the rules. That's the thing about power. Once it spreads too thin, everyone thinks they're a king. The next day, Nicky voted CeeLo out. No debate, no discussion. The council didn't protest, not even slick. They all saw it now. Saw what Nicky saw weeks before. CeeLo had become a liability. And in this game, liabilities die. He gave Frank the green light. The hit didn't happen fast. That wasn't Nicky's style. It happened quietly, calculated. No bullets, no noise. They poisoned his drink at a poker game in Queens. CeeLo collapsed in the bathroom. By the time the ambulance came, he was already gone. Overdose, they said. Just another Harlem king who partied too hard. No one asked questions. Not the streets, not the cops, not the council. And Nicky? He went to a jazz bar that night, sat alone in a booth, ordered a drink, listened to Coltrane while the world kept moving. He didn't smile, didn't grieve, just nodded once, like checking something off a list. Because the first betrayal always costs the most, not just in blood, in belief. And after CeeLo, Nicky never trusted any of them the same way again. The streets didn't mourn CeeLo. They whispered, speculated, maybe even smiled a little. But mourn? No. Because in Harlem, death was routine, especially for men who played dirty and dressed loud. Still, those whispers were sharp. They cut the air like razors. Nicky handled him. Council cleaned their own. He broke the rules. That's what happens. The message was clear. The council wasn't just a drug empire, it was law. And Nicky Barnes, he was the judge, jury, and if necessary, executioner. But even kings look over their shoulder when the first head rolls. After CeeLo was erased, Something shifted in the air. The meeting stayed civil, the money kept flowing, but the trust? Gone. Everyone showed up earlier, spoke less, watched more. Suddenly, no one poured drinks without watching who touched the glass. No one lit a cigar without wondering if the match would spark more than tobacco. And Nicky felt it most of all. He could feel it in Frank's silence, in Jimmy's nervous smiles, in the way Slick started keeping his answers vague. They didn't say it, but it was there. Fear. And fear turns partners into strangers. So Nicky did what smart men do when they feel the tide turning. He started keeping records, not just financials, not just shipment logs, personal files. Each council member got one. A slim black folder, locked in a private drawer in Nicky's back office, a spot only he had the key to. Inside each folder were names, habits, weaknesses, mistakes. For Frank, it was his daughter's heroin addiction, something he never let the crew know. Nicky had a copy of the rehab bill, hidden receipts, even surveillance of the girl sneaking out to cop dope behind a Bronx bodega. For Jimmy, it was the side account in Panama. He'd siphoned a little off the top here and there. Nicky hadn't said a word, yet. For Slick, it was a tape, a conversation with a local politician, a judge actually, where Slick promised favors in exchange for case dismissals. Illegal, recorded, stored away, not for blackmail, not yet, just insurance. Because Nicky knew something most street kings never learned until it was too late. Loyalty fades, but leverage, that lasts. He started pulling back too, stopped going out as much, stopped showing up to parties, clubs, lounges. Harlem noticed, rumors flew. He's laying low, he's planning something. Maybe he's scared. The truth, he was watching. Every movement, every whisper, every pattern shift. He'd sit in his brownstone on Sugar Hill, lights low, staring out at the street while jazz played soft in the background. The streets used to feel like his stage. Now they felt like a threat. And yet, the money never stopped. That was the twisted part. While the trust decayed, the business thrived. Heroin flooded in through Vietnam routes. Mules moved it into the ports, then onto trucks, then into Harlem like clockwork. Cut right, bagged fast, sold faster. Addicts lined up for blue magic like it was medicine. And the council? They kept raking it in. It was like a broken marriage that still paid the bills. But even Nicky knew that kind of arrangement only lasts so long before someone sets fire to the house. The first real scare came in the fall of '76. Frank got arrested on a weapons charge, nothing heavy. But the arrest wasn't the problem. The silence was. Usually, when a council member got pinched, the crew moved fast. Lawyers called, bail got posted, paperwork filed. But this time, Frank sat for 3 days, and Nicky noticed. He went to see him. No guards, no press, just Nicky in his gray suit sliding into the visiting booth like a preacher visiting a wayward flock. Frank looked tired, heavily tired, didn't even curse, just said, "You came." Nicky stared back, calm. "You expected someone else?" Frank didn't answer, didn't need to. That night, Nicky made 2 phone calls, one to the lawyer, the other to a cop. By morning, Frank was out. But when they met again, behind closed doors, no other council members around, Frank's tone was different. "You think they let me sit on purpose?" he asked. Nicky didn't answer. Frank looked at him hard. "If they left me in there, who's to say they won't leave you?" Nicky finally replied, cold. "They won't get the chance." That's when the paranoia turned personal. Not fear of cops, not fear of snitches, fear of each other. The next meeting was stiff, tense. Nicky spoke softly, clearly, but with no warmth. They talked money, roots, expansion, but no one made eye contact. No one laughed, no one lit a cigar. The room felt like a funeral. And yet, nobody walked away. Because here's the truth about power. Even when the trust dies, the greed keeps people together. For now. Nicky started carrying 2 guns again. One in the waistband, one in the ankle holster, just like the old days before suits and chauffeurs and magazine covers. He started checking his own food, watching his driver closer, switching up routes, changing numbers every week. Every man he shook hands with, he kept his left hand close to his hip. Every smile he gave was laced with suspicion, even with the council. Especially with the council. In private, he told himself he was just being smart, careful, prepared. But deep down, a darker voice had started to whisper, "It's not a council anymore. It's a cage." And he was the lion inside, admired, feared, and one wrong move from getting shot in the back by the same men who once kissed his ring. One night, he sat alone in his office staring at all 7 black folders, 6 filled with dirt, leverage, rot, and one. One was blank. His. He pulled it out, opened it, stared at the empty pages. For the first time in years, Nikki Barnes felt something close to grief, not because he was afraid, but because he knew, somewhere deep in his gut, that no matter how careful he played it, he wouldn't make it out of this clean. It's strange how an empire can rot while everything still looks perfect from the outside. Harlem was still quiet. The streets were still humming. Blue magic still hit the corners like gold. The kids still whispered Nicky's name like he was some kind of half-god, half-devil. But inside the council, the walls were buckling. Nicky felt it, not in what they said, but in what they didn't. It started with Jimmy Numbers Carter. He'd been Nicky's cleanest operator for years, ran the books like a banker, never flashy, never messy. He knew every dollar before it touched the street. But lately, Jimmy had started slipping. One week, a count came up short, not much, maybe $7,000 off a warehouse exchange. The next week, it was $12,000. Then $40,000. Nicky didn't call it out right away. He let it sit, let Jimmy squirm a little. Let the silence talk for him. Because Nicky had learned something about power. You don't confront a snake. You let it think it's safe, then you cut off the head. One night in his brownstone, Nicky poured a drink, sat in his office, and pulled Jimmy's file out of the drawer. He opened it like it was a Bible. Inside, photos, receipts, copies of wire transfers to a shell account in Panama, offshore, hidden under his cousin's name. Nicky stared at it. No emotion, no rage, just math. 168,000 skimmed in the last 9 months. For a man making millions, it wasn't much. But it wasn't about the money. It was the disrespect. You didn't steal from the council. And you sure as hell didn't steal from Nicky. He could have had Jimmy gone in a week. Frank had a hitter ready. Silent guy. No rap sheet. Worked for cash and silence. But Nicky waited. He wasn't looking to punish Jimmy. He was looking to see who helped him. Because if Jimmy was stealing, someone was covering for him. And that's when Nicky turned his eyes to Slick. Slick had always been the charming one. Smiles, laughs, handshakes with politicians. He talked judges out of indictments, knew which cops to buy and which ones to blackmail, wore suits with loud colors and louder shoes. Harlem loved him, but Nicky had noticed something new. Slick had gone quiet, started skipping meetings, started sending runners in his place, and his name, it had started popping up in whispers. You hear what Slick said? Slick's talking Jersey expansion, without council approval. It was soft, low-frequency noise. But to Nicky, it was a scream. So he made a move. Not a hit, not a threat, just a test. He had Jimmy deliver a fake shipment log to Slick's club. Inside the envelope was an altered inventory list, made to look like a drop from South Philly was light by 3 bricks. It was bait, and Slick took it. 2 days later, Nicky got word. Someone was already selling the missing bricks on the Bronx side, cheap and uncut. It wasn't the real product, just street junk dressed to fool. But it told Nicky everything he needed to know. Slick and Jimmy were running side plays. And if they weren't just stealing. They were planning. Nicky sat with Frank in a backroom bar that smelled like cigars and old wood. Just the two of them. He laid it all out. The files, the accounts, the whispers. Frank didn't blink. I say we take 'em both, he said. Same night, quiet, no blowback. Nicky lit a cigarette, took a slow drag. Exhaled through his nose, then said, Not yet. Frank frowned. Why not? They're cutting your legs from under you. Nicky's eyes stayed cold. Because I want to see who they're working with. Two snakes don't start a revolution. They need a third. That third would reveal himself sooner than expected. A week later, a low-level courier, a 19-year-old kid named Dante who ran pickups for Jimmy, got arrested outside of Yonkers. Routine stop. Car smelled like dope. Cops searched the trunk, found 10 bricks in a burner. That wasn't the problem. The problem was what Dante told the cops. Not because he was scared, because he was told to. He gave them a story, a cleaned-up version of the operation. Names redacted, routes rearranged. He said he worked for a guy named Ray, not Slick, not Jimmy, but Ray Slick Jackson. He said he never met anyone named Nicky. He said Jimmy just did numbers. To most, it would have sounded like damage control. To Nicky, it was insurance. Slick and Jimmy were trying to pin everything on him. If the feds came knocking, they'd hand Nicky over with a bow on top. Keep their pockets, keep their deals, keep their lives. Let Nicky burn. That night, Nicky didn't go home. He drove. No destination. Just Harlem lights reflecting in his windshield, jazz crackling low on the radio, windows down. He passed the blocks he used to own, the corners where his name echoed like prophecy, the storefronts he paid for, the clubs he funded, the kids who once pointed and said, "That's him." Now, no one looked twice. He was a shadow of himself, still powerful, still feared, but alone. And maybe that's when it truly hit him, not the betrayal. Not the plot, not even the threat, but the reality that this thing, this empire, this council, this dream of black men running a kingdom with discipline, it was dead. Had been for a while. They were just playing out the string. A bunch of thieves and cowards wearing suits like armor, smiling at each other while they sharpened knives under the table. So Nicky made a decision. He called Frank. 3 words. Pull the plug. The next 48 hours moved fast. Frank's crew hit Jimmy's stash house in Jersey, burned it down. Another team caught Slick's second in command outside a pool hall, pistol whipped him, carved a warning in his chest. NB never sleeps. No one touched Jimmy, no one touched Slick, not yet. Nicky wasn't finished watching them bleed. He wanted one last council meeting. Face to face, no games, no lies. A final gathering, to see if anyone still had the balls to look him in the eye and pretend this was still a family. They met at night. Not in a club, not in a lounge, not even in one of their usual safe houses. This time, Nicky called the meeting in a quiet brownstone in East Harlem, half gutted, half renovated. No power, no lights, just a battery lamp on the table and the creaking sound of a city that no longer cared who ruled it. It was poetic, really. A decaying empire, a ruined building, and the 7 men who had once run Harlem like kings, now staring at each other like strangers with loaded guns. Nicky arrived last. Slick, Jimmy, Frank, Slim, Blues, and the others were already seated. None of them spoke, none of them smiled. They had all heard the whispers about the stash house in Jersey, about the warning carved into Slick's man's chest, about Nicky pulling strings behind the curtain like God himself. But no one dared bring it up yet, because no one wanted to be the first man to bleed. Nicky walked in slow, dressed sharp as ever. Charcoal gray suit, gold cufflinks, no jewelry except his watch. His shades hid the storm in his eyes. He didn't shake hands, didn't greet anyone. Just walked to the head of the table and sat. For a full minute, no one said a word. Just the buzz of the lamp, the hum of fear, and the weight of a man who had nothing left to prove. Then Nicky spoke. Calm, measured. 10 years ago, we sat around a table like this and built something that changed Harlem. He let the words hang. Now, that same table feels like a fucking coffin. No one interrupted. He scanned the room, one face at a time. Used to be loyalty, order, rules. Now, I look around and I see rats hiding behind Rolexes. Slick shifted in his seat. Jimmy's jaw tightened. Frank just sat still, unreadable. You think I don't see it? Nicky asked. Think I don't hear the backdoor deals? The missing bricks? The side plays? I got people whispering your names in alleys like you're still ghosts. You ain't ghosts. You're just soft. Still silence. Nikki leaned forward. Jimmy, you got anything you want to tell me? Jimmy cleared his throat. Nikki, whatever you're hearing, stop. Nikki raised a hand, flat, calm. I got Panama wire transfers. I got your cousin's name on paperwork. I got fucking dates. Don't insult me. Jimmy froze. Nikki turned to Slick. You? You're just stupid. Setting up your own route through Jersey, using runners I didn't clear, trying to build your own little kingdom. You think you're untouchable now? Slick's voice cracked. You ain't the only one who built this. Nikki stood up so fast his chair screeched back. I am the reason any of you are still breathing. His voice didn't rise. It dropped, like a warning shot from the soul. Then he looked around again. At this point, I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you plot behind my back. What I care about is respect. He paused. And right now, none of you are giving it. Still, no one moved, so Nikki made it simple. This is what happens now. No more side routes. No more off-the-book deals. Everything goes through me. Everything. Slick scoffed. So we just your workers now? Nikki smiled, but there was no warmth. You've always been my workers. You just forgot. Frank finally spoke. His voice was deep, rough like sandpaper. You pulling the plug, Nikki? Nikki didn't blink. I already did. Jimmy shifted in his seat. You threatening us? No, I'm cleaning house. He pulled a folder from his coat, dropped it on the table. Inside, copies of every piece of evidence he had, the files, the bank accounts, the names. He didn't slide it to anyone, just left it there, like a body. If I go down, Nikki said, you all come with me. Judges, lawyers, stash spots, routes. I got it all. You ever think of crossing me again? You better be ready to bury yourself first. No one said a word. Because what do you say to a man who's already burned his bridges and kept the flames in his pockets? After a few minutes, Nikki sat again. And then, something strange happened. He softened. The fire left his voice. I didn't want this, he said quietly. I wanted legacy. I wanted something that would outlive us. But you can't build legacy with cowards. He looked at Slick and Jimmy, not with rage, but disappointment. You broke the code. You disrespected the seat. And when men do that, they don't deserve the table anymore. He stood again. Meeting's over. And just like that, he turned and walked out. No shouting, no bullets, just finality. But what the rest of them didn't know, what none of them saw coming, was that Nikki already had another meeting lined up, not with the council, with the feds. That same night, Nikki met in a blacked-out van with a federal contact, Agent Morris, clean-cut, cold-eyed, the kind of man who never blinked unless he was reading you. You ready? Morris asked. Nikki lit a cigarette. I just buried what was left of my kingdom. I got nothing left to protect but myself. Morris nodded. And you got names? I got more than names, Nikki said. I got truth. For a moment, Morris studied him. You ever think how this ends? Nikki looked him dead in the eye. Yeah. And? Nikki took a drag. Let the smoke out slow. Alone. Because Nikki wasn't stupid. He knew the streets would call him a rat. He knew Harlem would erase his murals. He knew the council would try to kill him. But at this point, he didn't care. Because betrayal cuts both ways. And when the ones you raised turn on you, you either die quietly or you set fire to everything. The federal office was cold, not just the temperature, the energy. The kind of cold that didn't come from AC vents, but from consequences. Lives changed in rooms like this. Names were erased, others were carved into court records. Nikki sat at the long steel table, hands folded, sunglasses off. He looked older than Harlem remembered. The velvet swagger was gone. What sat across from the feds now was a man stripped of myth, but still full of fire. Agent Morris sat opposite him. No tape recorder, no pen in hand yet, just watching. You sure about this? Morris asked. Nikki leaned back in the chair, calm, silent, then finally said, "If I was going to back out, I wouldn't be sitting here." There was no legal deal in place yet. No immunity, no sentence reduction, no protection guarantee, nothing official. But Nicky didn't care. He wasn't there to bargain. He was there to destroy. Morris signaled to another agent. A box was placed on the table. Thick folders, paperwork, photos, audio cassettes, intel. They'd gathered all they could about the council over the years. But as Morris tapped the box, he said, "You know we've never been able to pin much of this on you. You were always careful." Nicky nodded slowly. "Careful doesn't mean innocent." Morris raised an eyebrow. "So why now?" Nicky stared across the table, eyes dead still. "Because I built an empire, and then I watched it rot." He started slow. Names, real names, street names, old contacts, defunct warehouses, stash house blueprints from years back. He talked about Frank, Jimmy, Slick, Slim, and the runners below them. The layers, the way each man operated, who answered to who. Not just hearsay, structure. Frank runs enforcement, always has. If a body dropped 9 times out of 10, it came from him, directly or by word. Jimmy's the accountant, Panama accounts, Cayman too, but he uses cousin fronts. I got copies of wire transfers. I'll give you the routing numbers. Slick handles politicians, judges. 2 of them took bribes, both sitting right now. 1 just retired. I got the envelopes. I got their wives' names. Morris leaned back, halfway between stunned and impressed. "Where'd you keep all this?" Nicky smirked. "I don't forget. You don't survive this long unless your memory is a weapon." They paused to change tapes. Nicky sipped water, eyes never leaving the agent's face. "You know," Morris said, "some would say you're betraying your brothers." Nicky laughed once, just once, sharp and bitter. "They betrayed me first, left me rotting while they got fat, moved my product without cutting me in, slept with my wife. You think loyalty survives that?" He leaned forward. "This ain't betrayal, it's correction." Then came the big names. Nicky pulled out a slip of paper from his inside jacket. 3 judges, 2 politicians, 4 cops. Morris looked at it. His face went pale. "You sure about these?" "Positive." He pointed to the first name. "That one? He dismissed 2 homicide cases tied to Frank. Got 10 grand for it. You check court records, you'll find the inconsistencies." Then the next. "That one launders money through a boxing gym. We funneled over 100 grand through it in 73 alone." And the next. "Cop, works narcotics, tips off stash house locations in exchange for a cut." Morris sat back. This wasn't a statement anymore. It was a reckoning. Nicky kept going. He talked about the couriers, how they were selected, how they were paid, how many bricks they moved a week. He laid out the shipping routes, how dope moved through dead soldiers' coffins from Vietnam, through crooked airport employees, into the boroughs. He explained how the council laundered cash, car washes, construction companies, fake payrolls. He gave names, addresses, paper trails. He even described how the hits were called. Never direct, always coded. You hear someone say, "He's late to church?" That means he's not making it past Sunday. After 3 hours, the agents stopped the tape. They were overwhelmed. What they'd just been given was years of legwork, now handed over like a blueprint. One agent leaned forward, voice low. "If we use this, your face is everywhere. You'll be marked. You'll need relocation, maybe a new identity." Nicky stared at him. "Just keep me alive long enough to watch him fall." The next week was non-stop. More interviews, more paperwork, more nights in safe houses with fake names and cold meals. Nicky gave them everything. He testified in private sessions under aliases to federal prosecutors. He pointed out faces in lineups, circled names on confidential files, added details the feds didn't even know to look for. He wasn't guessing. He was surgical. And it wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. Even now, behind glass, behind guards, behind federal tape recorders, he still controlled the fate of Harlem. The council had no idea yet. They were still operating like business as usual, still moving weight, still collecting, still smiling like wolves who thought the fence was holding. But it wouldn't be long. Storms don't give warnings. They just arrive. One night, after another long debrief, Nikki sat alone in a federal safe house. Dim light, thin mattress, nothing in the room but a Bible, a folder, and a cup of cold coffee. He picked up the folder, his own statement, 200 pages thick, everything he had said, everything he had confessed to, every person he had betrayed. He ran a finger down the edge, quiet, not sad, not afraid, just still. Because this wasn't about getting out. This wasn't about clearing his name. This was about watching the kingdom he built burn and knowing that the fire had his name on it. It started with a knock, not a raid, not a shootout, not a dramatic chase through back alleys or rooftops, just a knock. Federal agents, warrants in hand, faces unreadable. Frank Black Ice. Wilkins opened the door of his Queens apartment at 6:03 a.m., wearing a white undershirt and pajama pants, steam rising from the coffee mug in his hand. 3 agents stepped forward. 1 read the charges: RICO, conspiracy, murder for hire, obstruction, drug trafficking. Frank didn't flinch. He didn't curse, didn't fight. He just blinked and said, "It was Nikki, wasn't it?" The agents didn't answer. They didn't need to. That same morning, across town, Jimmy Numbers Carter was gone. Disappeared like smoke. He'd caught wind days earlier, maybe from a court clerk he used to pay off, maybe from a cousin in the U.S. Attorney's office. All anyone knew was that by the time the feds kicked down his office door, the lights were off, the drawers empty, the safe cleared. A single post-it was left behind on his desk. "Y'all move too slow." Ray Slick Jackson wasn't as lucky. He was caught leaving a high-end bar in Midtown, dressed like Harlem royalty. Silk shirt, gold chain, 2 women on his arms. He never saw it coming. 6 plainclothes agents surrounded him, pulled him into an unmarked car, and drove him downtown before the ice in his drink had time to melt. He laughed in the car. "Is this about traffic?" No one responded. Then, one agent handed him a copy of the sealed indictment. He flipped through the first few pages. Page 3 listed the charges. Page 4? His name, circled in red ink, written by Nicky himself. He stopped laughing after that. By noon, 7 federal arrests had been made across New York and New Jersey, all tied to what the press would soon call the Harlem heroin ring. The council wasn't just bleeding. It was dead. Inside the U.S. Attorney's office, Agent Morris stood in front of a whiteboard filled with names, dates, arrows. He crossed out Jimmy's name with a black marker. "Still out there," he muttered. Then he circled Frank's. "In custody, no bail." Then Slick. "Detained, lawyered up, crying loyalty." He turned to Nikki, who sat nearby, relaxed, silent, watching it all play out like a man who'd seen this movie before. Morris asked, "You satisfied?" Nikki took a long sip of water and answered without blinking. "No, not yet." The press caught on by evening. Federal sweep takes down major Harlem drug syndicate. Former allies accused in decade-long heroin ring. Sources say federal informant may be former Kingpin. They didn't say his name, not yet, but Harlem knew. Every corner, every barbershop, every hustler still breathing. They all knew. The whispers grew louder. Nicky snitched. He flipped. Untouchable turned rat. Murals were painted over. Old partners ducked into apartments. Street soldiers started burning ledgers, phones, photos. The streets didn't mourn the council. They feared what else Nicky might say. In his holding cell, Frank didn't speak for 48 hours. Didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't eat much. Just stared at the wall. And when the feds played Nicky's testimony, grainy audio, calm tone, names spoken without hesitation, Frank closed his eyes. He remembered the day Nicky had brought him in. Suited up, proud, spoke of loyalty, brotherhood, a black empire built from the street up, not from scraps left by white men in tall buildings. And now? That same voice was dismantling everything they'd built, brick by brick, life by life. At his arraignment, Slick tried to put on a show. Silk shirt under a cheap suit, designer shoes still laced. He smiled for the press, raised his cuffed wrists like a martyr. But inside? Inside, he was folding. His lawyer whispered, "They got you dead on 3 felonies. Best we can hope for is a deal." Slick hissed, "What kind of deal?" The lawyer just looked at him and said, "The kind you wish you made before Nikki did." Meanwhile, Nikki remained under wraps, protected, hidden. He was no longer walking Harlem streets. He was in a secured federal safe house, guarded 24/7, shuffled between interviews and strategy meetings. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't smiling. He was focused. He'd asked to hear the reactions. Morris obliged. They gave him photos, Frank in cuffs, Slick looking pale in court, newspaper headlines. They even played him an intercepted prison phone call between 2 low-level soldiers. "You think he gonna stop?" "Hell no. Nicky don't stop. He don't got nothing left to lose." Nicky listened quietly, then asked, "What about Jimmy?" Morris shook his head. "Still missing. But we'll find him." Nicky smirked. "No, you won't. He's too smart. Only one who saw this coming." Then he went silent. In Harlem, things began to shift. Without the council, territory wars began to resurface. Old grudges boiled back up. Younger dealers, hungry and reckless, started making power plays. But something was missing. Fear. When Nicky ran Harlem, there were rules. Brutal ones, yes, but rules nonetheless. Now, it was chaos in a tailored suit. And the ones who remembered the old days, they just shook their heads. Because they knew. The king was gone. But behind federal glass, Nicky was still working. He wasn't just giving names. He was giving context. This is how Frank covered hits. He used stolen cop radios, faked gang beefs. This is how Jimmy laundered through construction bids. Fake payroll. This is where Slick kept blackmail. Lockbox under his office floorboard. Code was his daughter's birthday. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter. Because this wasn't revenge. This was surgery. Cutting the cancer from the empire he once loved. At one point, Agent Morris asked him, "You ever regret it?" Nicky took a long breath, then answered, "I regret giving loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. That's it." By the end of the week, indictments had reached over 43 people, not just council members, but judges, lawyers, cops, city workers, runners, bagmen, stash girls, and drivers. The web Nicky had built was now being burned from the inside, and every strand was a name he gave. In Harlem, people stopped saying his name, not because they forgot it, because they feared it. Even in hiding, Nikki Barnes still had power. Not over streets, not over money, but over truth. He had become the thing every criminal fears, the man who knows everything, and finally decides to talk. They told him to pack light. "Just the essentials," the marshal said, like Nicky was heading on a short vacation. Like he wasn't about to vanish into the folds of America under a name that meant nothing. The folder they handed him had his new identity, new name, new date of birth, new hometown he never visited, new social security number, fake diploma, backstory neat enough to pass questions at a bus stop, but vague enough to disappear in a crowd. He flipped through the folder slowly, then set it down without a word. 2 days later, he was gone. No press release, no court farewell, no last look at Harlem, just a midnight ride in a black SUV with government plates, windows tinted, heading out into a nowhere town that didn't know or care who Nicky Barnes used to be. The air felt different out there. No sirens, no booming music from the block, no corner boys, no scent of fried food and danger on the same breeze. Just clean roads, strip malls, and a gas station that closed at 9 p.m. His new apartment was beige, every part of it. The walls, the carpet, the furniture, beige like they were trying to erase personality before it even had a chance to grow. The bedroom had one window. The blinds were already drawn. He stood in the living room that first night, suitcase untouched, lights off, letting the silence press in around him. The marshal had said, "You'll adjust, you're smart, you'll be fine." And maybe that was true. But fine wasn't the life Nicky used to live. Fine was the sound your enemies made when they no longer feared you. He didn't sleep the first week, just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the ghosts that kept pulling at the corners of his mind. Frank, Jimmy, Slick, Karen, even his own face haunted him, because the mirror didn't show Nicky Barnes anymore. It showed a man who no longer existed, and somewhere inside, he missed that man. Not for what he did, but for how the world used to look at him. He got a job, eventually. Office work, filing, mostly alone. No one asked questions. He made just enough money to keep the lights on, buy groceries, and pay for gas he barely used. He'd leave early, arrive early, eat alone. People just called him Mr. B. No one looked closer. That's how witness protection works. You don't blend in, you fade. Some nights, he'd drive to a small diner off the highway and sit by the window. Just coffee, no food. He liked the way the neon lights flickered on the linoleum floor. It reminded him of club backlights in Harlem, long before everything got complicated. Sometimes he'd eavesdrop on the other tables. Old couples, truckers, college kids passing through. He wasn't interested in their stories. He was trying to remember what normal used to feel like. They told him not to watch the news, too risky. But he did anyway. Low volume, eyes locked. He watched trials unfold from afar, recognized the names as they fell like dominoes. One council member got 25 to life. Another took a deal, 10 years in witness protection. One died in custody, one flipped. Nicky watched it all happen like a man sitting at his own funeral, alive but invisible. And when the news finally moved on, when Harlem stopped getting headlines, he realized something chilling. The world moved on without him. He started writing, not books, not letters, just memories, scraps of the past. The first time he held a stack of real cash, the first body he ordered, the first woman he ever trusted, the last man he ever feared. He didn't write for forgiveness. He didn't believe in that. He wrote because he was the only one left who remembered it right. History has a way of twisting, especially when the storytellers are dead or locked up. So he wrote it down, quietly, for himself. Maybe one day someone would find it. Maybe no one ever would. But it was something, a tether to who he had been. Occasionally the marshals checked in, not often, just enough to make sure he was breathing. "How's life?" "Quiet." "You okay?" "I'm alive." They never stayed long. They didn't care who he was before, just that he didn't fuck it up now. One afternoon, maybe a year in, he went for a walk, just around the block, just to move. He passed a group of teenagers, loud, laughing, full of reckless energy. They barely noticed him, but one kid looked his way, just for a second. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Doubt? Instinct? Nicky looked back, calm, but his mind raced. Had the past caught up? The kid turned away, kept walking. Nicky stood still for another 10 minutes. He never saw the boy again. But that night, he moved his chair so it faced the door. Time passed. He got older. His joints ached. His hair thinned. His chest tightened in the cold. But the thing that wore on him most wasn't physical. It was the emptiness. Not guilt. He had long since stopped measuring his life by right or wrong. It was something colder, deeper, a loneliness that couldn't be shared. He had silenced everyone who ever knew him, and in doing so, he'd silenced himself. Some nights he dreamt of Harlem, not the chaos, not the dope, not the murder, but the rhythm, the pulse, the scent of street meat in summer, the fire hydrants spraying kids in the heat, the sound of jazz echoing through a cracked window, the world he tried to rule, the world he had to abandon. And in those dreams, he was never wearing a suit. He was just Nicky, the man before the myth, the boy who wanted to be more than broke, the man who ended up with everything and lost it all. In 2012, he died. No funeral, no service, no obituary in the Times, just a sealed file, a quiet cremation, a closed case. The man who once ruled Harlem like a black godfather was now a ghost in a government archive. Some said it was cancer. Others said the past caught up to him. But the truth? He died the way he'd lived since the day he flipped. Alone, silent, untouchable. The Harlem Nicky Barnes ruled doesn't exist anymore. The clubs have changed names. The bodegas are different. The dope is cheaper, deadlier, and messier. The kids now wear earbuds instead of pagers. They don't salute corners. They chase likes. But if you sit long enough in one of the old barbershops or lean against the gate outside of the old number spot that got turned into a dry cleaner, you'll still hear it. Remember when Nicky ran this block? It's never a long conversation, never loud, always low, cautious, like saying his name too clearly might make him appear. Some speak with awe, some with bitterness, some just shrug, like the whole Barnes era was a dream the neighborhood had once, a big, loud, bloody dream. An old man named Ernie, who used to shine shoes outside the Apollo back in the day, still remembers him. He sits outside every Saturday morning, same stool, same attitude. Kids walk past and barely notice him. But every so often, one stops to ask something stupid like, "Hey, old head, who's that in that mural over there?" Ernie squints, chews his gum slow. That's Leroy Barnes, boy. Used to be the man." The kid shrugs. "Was he a rapper?" Ernie doesn't even answer that. He just looks out at the block, shaking his head. A few blocks down, June, a retired schoolteacher who watched the neighborhood change through 4 generations, still crosses herself every time she passes 147th and Lenox. That was the spot where 2 brothers were shot execution style in '78. Junkies who skimmed off blue magic and tried to start their own little side hustle. Nicky had them handled in broad daylight. People still talk about how no one screamed, how the crowd just opened around the shooters like the parting of the Red Sea, then closed up like nothing happened. June tells the story like a warning, especially to the young women who think the new breed of drug dealers have power. "You don't know what power is," she says. "You just know noise. That man could get a body dropped with a phone call and still have time to make it to church." There's a mural off 8th Avenue, half faded, colors bleeding under the weight of time and sun. It used to be bright. Nikki Barnes, King of Harlem. That's what it said. Now the paint's chipped. The crown on his head looks more like a stain. No one maintains it. No one defends it when new artists paint over it. A kid tagged the word rat across his face one summer, and no one cleaned it up, not even the old heads. Because that's the split. Some still call him king, others call him traitor, and both are right. Trey, a 27-year-old corner kid with gold fronts and 2 burner phones in his coat, sells fentanyl now, not heroin. He doesn't remember Nicky, not really, but he knows the name. Everyone does. He calls him the Blueprint, but not in a flattering way. "That dude showed us how to move weight, sure," Trey says. "But he also showed us how not to trust no fucking body." He shrugs. Soon as they flipped on him, he flipped back. Ain't no honor in this. Just survival. That's how they talk now. No loyalty, no brotherhood, just moves and counters. The game got colder, and some blame Nicky for that. But the younger generation, most of them don't know him at all. To them, Nikki Barnes is just a name in an old rap lyric or a blurry headline they never read. "Who's that again?" they ask. "Was he like Ghost from Power?" No, fool, he was real. But even that doesn't hit, because reality doesn't shine like fiction. And Harlem moved on. A few documentaries floated around in the 2000s, a book or two. A movie almost got made, but it fell through. People debated it online for a while. Message boards, street forums. Some said he was a genius, a visionary, a product of oppression who flipped the system in his favor. Others said he was poison, a man who poisoned his own community, then sold out the very brothers who helped him do it. But the truth is quieter. Because what's left of Nikki Barnes in Harlem isn't statues or street names or celebrations. It's the echo of control, the memory of order, the knowledge that once upon a time, a black man walked these streets and ran it tighter than the mob, built a structure so clean, so ruthless, that the government had to rip it out from the root. That doesn't get forgotten, even if his name fades. Frank Black Ice Wilkins died in prison in 2004. He never talked, never cooperated, didn't leave behind letters, didn't try to clear his name. He just faded, one of the last men to carry that code all the way to the grave. Some say he still had a picture of Nicky in his locker. Others say he used it as a dartboard. No one knows. Jimmy Numbers Carter was never found. Rumors say he escaped to the Caribbean. Others say he was buried under a new name in Arizona, working as a finance manager at a used car lot. No photos and no voice recordings, just rumors. But if you mention Nicky around certain men from Brooklyn, they'll say, Jimmy ain't dead, he just don't talk no more. Slick? Slick tried to rebuild, got out on a technicality, launched a real estate company in Jersey, gave interviews, talked big about the lessons of the past, but no one bought it. Harlem didn't welcome him back. He was seen as soft. A man who survived not because he outsmarted the system, but because Nicky did all the dirty work first. He lives quiet now, off-grid. Still wears those loud suits, still slicks his hair back, but his name don't ring anymore, not like it used to. And as for Nicky, no one talks about what happened to him after. They know he died in 2012. They know the feds buried his identity with him. They know his body was cremated and his ashes scattered somewhere not even his daughters were allowed to visit. But in Harlem, they don't talk about the death. They talk about the silence that came before it. The silence that stretched across the city when word got out that Mr. Untouchable had talked. The silence when boys stopped idolizing kings and started thinking survival meant snitching first. The silence that whispered, if Nicky flipped, anyone could. And in that way, he changed Harlem more with his silence than he ever did with his power. The room was small, too small for a man who once held Harlem in his palm. A twin bed, a lamp, a dresser with one drawer that stuck when you pulled it too hard. One window that faced an empty parking lot, paint peeling at the edges of the ceiling, carpet so thin you could feel the wood beneath. It wasn't a prison, but it wasn't freedom either. It was the kind of room you die in quietly, after a life lived too loud. And that's exactly where Nikki Barnes was now. The name was gone, officially. In the files, he was someone else. A man with a birth certificate from Ohio, a made-up past, a made-up social. But the thing about ghosts? They don't disappear just because you stop saying their name. They haunt you from the inside out. He sat in that room most days now, didn't go out much, didn't trust people, didn't talk much. He watched the news sometimes, low volume, eyes glazed, same stories, same wars, different faces. Nobody said his name anymore, not even to whisper, not even to curse. And that was the part he hadn't prepared for. See, he always knew he'd be hated. That part was easy. You take down 43 men, snitch on judges, bury your own crew with your words. You expect that smoke. But what he never expected was to be forgotten. He kept a notebook under the bed. Old leather. Pages yellowed at the edges. Inside, his handwriting was small, neat, controlled, just like he used to be. The notebook wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology either. It was memory. One page listed names: Frank, Jimmy, Slick, Slim, Blues, C-Lo. He'd underlined Frank's name twice, wrote next to it, loyal to death. That don't make it right. Next to Jimmy's, saw it coming. Should have buried him first. Slick. Wanted to be me. Couldn't even be him. Karen's name appeared once. No underline, no note, just the name. That was enough. Another page had a list of numbers, the real kind. Weight moved, money earned, bodies dropped, all the math of a kingdom built on poison. What, $10,000. That was the last net total before it all cracked. He stared at that number sometimes, mouthing it like a curse. All that money, all that risk. And in the end, he had a twin bed, a broken drawer, and a name no one spoke. He used to tell himself he didn't regret it, that the betrayal was mutual, that they all would have done the same if they were in his shoes, that flipping wasn't weakness, it was chess. But regret? It creeps in when the noise stops. It talks to you when the TV's off and the only sound in the room is your own breath. He thought a lot about his father near the end. Man didn't stay long in his life, left when Nicky was young. Left him with a mother who worked herself raw and a city that chewed boys like him up for sport. He used to hate him. Now? Now he wondered if the man had figured something out early. That some men don't get to grow old and proud, some men only get to survive, and that surviving long enough means burying everyone else. He coughed more these days, chest tight, lungs brittle. The nurse said it was nothing serious, just age, just the cold air, just life catching up. But Nicky felt it, the weight in his ribs, like the body knew it was almost done pretending to be alive. One night, around 3 a.m., he got up and walked into the tiny kitchenette, heated some water, sat at the counter, sipping it like tea. No sugar, no honey, just heat and memory. He reached for the notebook again and wrote something on the last page. You can win the war. Still lose the man. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the book, didn't open it again. A few weeks before his death, a marshal came by. Routine visit, check-in, box ticked. The young guy didn't know who Nicky had been, just knew he was a high-priority former federal cooperator. The marshal asked, "You need anything, sir?" Nicky looked at him, not angry, not tired, just done. "Yeah, a time machine." The marshal laughed, awkward. "If I find one, I'll send it your way." Nicky didn't smile, just said, "Don't bother, I wouldn't change much." But that wasn't true, and Nicky knew it. There were things he'd change. He would have watched the council closer before they betrayed him, would have left Harlem a year earlier, would have never let Karen get close to the gang, would have shot Jimmy in '75. But most of all, he wouldn't have believed in loyalty. That word, it had cost him more than bullets ever did. A few days before the end, he called the marshal's emergency line, asked them to send someone to pick up the notebook under his bed. "Send it to the archive," he said. "What archive?" the marshal asked. Nicky paused, then replied, "The one that forgets everything." They never found the meaning in that, but they took the notebook, stored it in a locked drawer. No one's opened it since. On the night of his death, it was raining. Soft, steady, silent rain. He didn't scream, didn't shake, didn't gasp for air. He just stopped. Like a light going out in a room no one visits anymore. There was no funeral, no obituary, no mourners. Just a file closed, a name erased, a story that ended where silence lives. And yet, somewhere in Harlem, in the cracked sidewalk of 147th, or the faded mural near Lenox, or the whisper of jazz that still leaks out of old windows, his name lingers. Not as a legend, not even as a warning, but as a question. What does power buy when the soul's the price? Years after Nicky Barnes died, alone, under a name not his own, in a room that forgot him even as it held him, Harlem kept moving. But some things lingered, not statues, not street names, not holidays or parades, just a feeling. Sometimes it's in the way the old heads pause when they talk about the past, not about the product, not the money, but the order, the way Harlem once had structure. How there was a time, brief and brutal, when chaos bowed to a council and a man in sunglasses decided how the night moved. Back then, they say, you knew who was in charge. And they never say his name too loud. Nicky Barnes became a ghost long before he died. Not the kind that haunts houses, the kind that lives in memory, the kind that people try to rewrite, in books, in barbershop tales, in blog posts, in Netflix specials. They paint him as king, as criminal, as sellout, as visionary. But the truth was more complicated. He was all of them, and none of them. He was a boy raised by a single mother in a system built to break him, a teenager with no choices and a city that dared him to survive, a man who made power out of poison and turned discipline into domination, a king who trusted the wrong soldiers, a leader who watched his own council trade loyalty for greed, a criminal who refused to die in prison for men who spit on his name, a witness who sold his past to keep breathing, a ghost who died in silence, remembered only in fragments. That's not a villain. That's not a hero. That's just a man. They still argue about him, in jailhouse phones and in late-night kitchen tables. Was he wrong to flip? Was he smart? Was he weak? Was he right? And no matter how many people answer, no one agrees. Because Nicky wasn't built for closure. He was built for impact. He didn't ask for forgiveness, never once said sorry, never tried to clean his image or chase legacy. He just vanished like he always knew he would. And maybe that was the real plan all along. In the years that followed, Harlem changed, gentrified, washed, repackaged, buildings renamed, rent raised, culture sold off in pieces. The corners where Nicky's name once echoed now sell overpriced coffee. The brownstone that held council meetings is now a yoga studio, and the kids, they don't know the name, but every so often, someone brings it up, not to glorify, just to remember. He ran Harlem, ran it clean, ran it cold, snitched in the end though, and then they pause. Because even now no one knows what to do with a man like Nicky Barnes. What do you call the man who built a kingdom with blood and intelligence, then burned it down with a signature? What do you call the man who made the system fear him, then handed them the keys to every door? What do you call the man who made Harlem bow, and then vanished from it like dust in a breeze? In a federal evidence locker, somewhere in a building with no windows, a box still sits. Inside is a leather-bound notebook, faded pages, handwritten truths. No one's read it. No one's filed it. No one's thrown it away. It just sits, silent, waiting for someone to open it, waiting for someone to try and understand. And maybe that's the final lesson of Nicky Barnes. That power doesn't always die with a bullet. Sometimes it dies with a whisper, with a locked box, with a name that's too heavy to say and too dangerous to forget. He was never untouchable. Not really. Because in the end, death touches everyone, even kings, even ghosts, even Nicky Barnes. And Harlem remembers, not with parades, not with praise, but with that quiet hesitation every time his name is mentioned. Because when a man like Nicky walks through history, he never leaves clean footprints.